This is CBS News color coverage of Man on the Moon. Sponsored by Kellogg's. Kellogg's puts more in your morning. Here from CBS News Apollo headquarters at Kennedy Space Center, correspondent Walter Cronkite.
Okay, how's that?
Fate has ordained that the men who went to the moon to explore in peace will stay on the moon to rest in peace. These brave men, Neil Armstrong and Edwin Aldrin, know that there is no hope for their recovery.
Hello, Neil and Buzz. I'm talking to you by telephone from the Oval Room at the White House, and this certainly has to be the most historic telephone call ever made from the White House.
Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11.
Oh, boy. Oh, boy, it looks good, Wally.
Somebody must be leaving the ground.
What a moment. Man on the way to the moon.
As we approach the moon will gradually grow larger and larger in size.
To this decision that I have made.
To this decision that I have made. Neil Armstrong and Edwin Aldrin know that there is no hope for their recovery.
Just let you hold this.
Yep.
Will stay on the moon to rest in peace. These brave men, Neil Armstrong and Edwin Aldrin, know that there is no hope for their recovery. But they also know that there is hope for mankind in their sacrifice.
Roger. Looks good.
Love it. And I didn't expect to. I was kind of waiting to get annoyed because there's been a number of pretty irresponsible deepfake creations. But I found myself focusing much more on the speech and enjoying the speech and feeling what an amazing opportunity it was to see that speech spoken in the way that felt believable. I mean, I was kind of moved. I was like, if that was me and I wasn't dead, like I was like, oh no, what happened to them?
I think it's very convincing, and the quality of the fake videos they generated is superb. So it's very, very difficult to find anything, visible artifacts in the videos.
If I'd walked into the room and looked at it, I would have thought it was Nixon. People believe things because of contextual clues. They rely on the fact you've got all the peripheral cues of reality, right? You have the CBS News, you have the anchor beforehand, and those make a huge difference because we rely on those cues to tell us if something's real. So if you get all those cues right and then you put a bit of fakery in the middle, it's quite likely people will be persuaded.
Because I knew it was a fake, I was looking for some of the telltale signs that if I was watching it on an even bigger screen, might have been able to see mismovements of the mouth. When the camera zoomed in, the shadow on the collar was something that I said looked, in my mind, it looked a little artificial. But that's not something I would clock if I was watching it on a telephone or if I had been watching it on a tube television.
I found myself thinking about the value of deepfakes in immersing people into an alternate reality, so long, of course, as they know that that's what they're about to be immersed in. I first and foremost found myself just feeling like props for the techniques and the work that goes into that simulacrum, and again, a kind of curious anticipation of the fun and education that could be had with it. I also couldn't help, in a way that maybe I wouldn't have if I'd just been reading the text as Bill Safire wrote it, about thinking about the oddity of they're supposedly still alive but running out of oxygen and they can't return, and speaking about everything they've done in the past tense. Like, what an odd speech that you may only pick up if you see it delivered that way.
It was a great fake. I've seen a lot of bad ones, and we've seen the technology develop so quickly, so that deepfake was incredibly convincing and provokes a conversation not only about that moment in time, but of course about the problem of misinformation, which I think you're ably doing here.
Deepfakes are audiovisual works in which the image of somebody is synthesized and can be used to make people look as if they're saying or doing something that they might not have really said or done. The term deepfake is a combination or portmanteau of the terms deep learning and fake. It's fake because it's synthesized, it's computer generated, and it's deep because it's based in a particular artificial intelligence technique called deep learning. Deep learning is an advance in artificial neural network-based approaches. Originally, they were based on a very much simplified model of the neuron. In fact, we now know that the neuron works with much more nuance than we have in artificial neural networks. In typical artificial neural networks, we try to find statistical patterns, regular patterns within the data, and map that to some kind of output. So what do those data points have to do with video data? Imagine every single pixel in video data when you freeze it at one particular instance. Then you can say that a video is a sequence of these frames. Each one could be composed into a number of different pixels. The input data, in this case the source, is the image of an actor, Louis D. Wheeler. He's giving the same speech that Nixon would have given if the moon landing had been unsuccessful, tragically. The output data, or the target, is a synthesized image of Richard Nixon giving that same speech. So instead of having the full video data, you have a smaller set of data points that might represent key features such as the chin, the mouth, the nose, the eyes. It might also recognize other patterns that a human wouldn't necessarily recognize within the data that the computer can latch onto, so to speak. The case of audio works in a very similar kind of way. You take that rich data, which is the audio data of the actor giving the speech, and then you reduce that down to key features. You think about that as an audio voice print of the initial actor. Then you take that audio voice print and you're trying to synthesize it to match the audio voice print of Richard Nixon himself giving the speech. You can imagine a deep fake as creating a synthetic Nixon that takes this rendering of this beautiful speech and Richard Nixon's other speeches and merging them together. So now you have that speech being given in the way that Richard Nixon normally would speak. In the case of deepfakes, there's a lot of anxiety about them being used for misinformation. People think about fake news, they think about all types of manipulation, whether that's political or otherwise, and so there's a lot of apprehension around this technology.
So when we look at the information ecosystem now, it's hard not to be depressed because of the scale of different types of misinformation and disinformation. So whether it's conspiracies, lies, false content labeled as satire when it's not? Is it imposter content when somebody uses a logo that you recognize but it's completely fabricated? Is it a trending topic on Twitter but that's actually being pushed by a ton of bots? Is it, an outrage meme on Facebook that's circulating widely? There's so many different elements of this. And then deepfakes has taken all of that and said that, and plus. If deepfakes had come along 10 years ago, say, and there hadn't been this moment of recognizing how people had weaponized the internet, we'd be like, new technology, like Photoshop, but worse. But now it's like, oh, are you kidding me?
I mean, to be clear, deepfakes can be really valuable. It's the deepfakes that hijacks careers, that ruin people's reputations, that so distort reality you could have a deep fake that, if timed just right, in a very sensitive situation, could lead to a riot. We're in a tinderbox right now in US polarized politics and society. And we've got to be on the lookout, because it may be not just the ruined IPO and not just the thrown election, but the physical harm that comes with riots.
The deepfake is the promise of using whatever it might be, generative adversarial networks or other machine learning techniques, to make it push button. You don't need to hire and find the actors. You don't need James Cameron and a $250 million budget to pull off Titanic. It's somehow taking it from the layers of sophistication down to the high school science fair, down to an app, face swap, that there can be as much or more of what you are subjected to during the day fake as real, in realms that we thought of as the real before, because anybody can generate it. Maybe that's what gets people nervous.
I don't know if we're completely understanding what it means to give this capacity out to the public. It could open up a whole another realm of creativity, but at the same time, I think about the people I study, who are people who do media manipulation and disinformation for a living. For them, it's not about creativity. It is about hoaxing, scamming, manipulating vast publics into mass hysteria in some instances. And I don't know if we're entirely, as a society, ready for that kind of deployment, given that we are also in the midst of a different kind of communication crisis with the loss of gatekeepers and the rise of social media as a distribution system.
Deepfakes are posing quite urgent threat to the trustworthiness of our online environment, right? Deepfake videos per se, just the fake video themselves or the audios themselves are, not that hard to detect, even by visual inspection. Many of them, they're not, like what I mentioned, highly crafted. But the problem is, they're coming to us at volume and with very fast speed.
And I think particularly important is that it doesn't need to be perfect. I think a lot of the emphasis on deepfakes and the kind of, when we look at them, is like, wow, they're these beautifully made objects like your deepfake, which is amazing, it's totally convincing, but in a lot of the contexts I work in, it doesn't need to be totally convincing to do damage. And in that case, the easier it gets to make deepfakes, the cheaper it gets. All those attack vectors open up, as well as the ones that use really well done deepfakes in very specific ways.
Right now, we're, I would say, on a precipice. You need a little bit more data than most people have. You need a little bit more computing power and skills than most people have. But those who are motivated to use deepfakes, by and large, use them to make pornography.
So, of course, the biggest use of deepfakes that never gets discussed is actually taking women's faces or bodies and using them and creating pornographic content. And I think most women don't necessarily recognize how vulnerable they are because of the amount of imagery most people have out about them online through Instagram posts, or it just isn't a conversation that people are necessarily having.
Technologies as they come on board are often used to abuse people at their most vulnerable. What drew us was what I would call invasions of sexual privacy, misusing, exploiting, appropriating someone's sexual identity and forcing them into being a porn star that they never chose to be. As someone who's written a whole lot about online harassment, stalking, threats, and non-consensual intimate imagery, to me, this was, of course, yet another story about using a technology to embarrass, shame, terrorize women, marginalized people.
What happened was the deepfake Reddit forum porn basis of deepfakes then got lumped in with very, very, very smart academics who'd built algorithms with really well-meaning intentions, and these two worlds have merged, And there's this kind of unintended consequences of some of those algorithms getting out into the wild from really nerdy, lovely academics who never ever thought about how it might get used. Women's lives are being impacted every single day. And I think if men were having their bodies used in the same way, we would have a lot more legislation. There'd be a much more action if it was happening to men.
And right now, deepfake sex video is actually pretty big business. There are 4 websites that have about 15,000 videos. 99% of those videos have women's faces inserted into porn without their consent.
As we start to move out in scale, there will have to be, and there will be, cottage industries for this, where people are making deepfakes that are highly personalized and do the same kind of damage. So you can imagine a company saying, yeah, send us, half a dozen pictures of your ex or whoever, and we'll make a deep fake of them. And the other company might also make a deep fake of them riding a horse through Fantasia, what have you, as a birthday card, right? And so you can imagine all these different use cases of it where we actually haven't worked out what's at stake, which is in many respects identity theft. Not your financial identity, but your actual personhood. Well, we don't even talk about it like identity theft, but that's what it is, right? Is like, it's actually the essence of who you are is what you look like and how you show up in public and the words that you use. So for someone to be able to steal that and change that, your identity it's more than who you are, it's your legacy. And if this is what you become known for, and if this is what is public about you, it can be just very damaging, And that to me is what's most concerning about how this industry might develop if there are no guardrails.
Deepfakes are detectable, right? So whenever any little steps that is, or aspects of the physical world, aspects of human body, or the generation process, all the signals or the models, they leave certain kind of trace, and all these little things will show up, probably very subtly in the final produced videos. If we know where to look, we can use algorithm to detect those things.
Do you think it would be possible to, since you have some detection technologies, run those detection technologies on the Nixon deepfake?
We could try. We haven't tried it. We'll try and let you know. All right. So we took the 2 videos you sent to us, and we do analysis, run our deepfake detection algorithm on them. So here is the detection results. What you are seeing here on the left panel is the video itself. On the right is our analysis. It's analyzing every frame in that video. Right, so we run the first video. And as you can see, it's highly likely to be an original video because it doesn't have that kind of artifacts we typically see in the deepfake video. On the other hand, we analyze the other video. We see very different results. And so you're seeing here, the score is mostly concentrating around 0. And that means that the algorithm actually detects a lot of artifacts that usually it sees from deepfake videos in the training data set.
So bottom line, the real one appears to be real via your detectors, and the fake one appears to be
fake. One appear to be fake, yes. We have an adversary. We have a group of people trying to beat our detection algorithm. What we're trying to do is not completely eliminating or sort of stopping deepfake videos. Even in the ideal case, for the completely automatic generated fake videos, our algorithm can never achieve 100% accuracy. There's always some room for mistakes. So we're just trying to raise the bar so that if somebody wants to make a fake video and they want to sort of make this convincing for a lot of people, then correspondingly this person has to put a lot of effort into generating it.
aside from that truly kind of cat and mouse, oh, how was it generated? Oh, can we trust the Geiger counter we have on it that says it's radioactive with deepfakishness? Would be, what's the provenance? Where did this thing come from? If this speech were really delivered, wouldn't there be an old New York Times headline from the next day that says Nixon gave this speech? And in fact, even 10 seconds of sort of checking it out would let you know that either the entire world is wrong and this is the one thing that's right, or this is the thing that's wrong and, you know, it's a deepfake.
How do you train people to spot deepfakes? Is to really embed it within, do you understand where this came from? Is it trying to elicit an emotional reaction and make you share it quickly? Are there corroborating sources? So it's media literacy, but really reinventing it for how social media works, which is like the 7-second moment where you're like, share. And I think that's when you also have to look at the responsibility of companies.
Platforms make all the difference in the spread, the virality of powerful, especially negative and novel deepfakes. So I've been working with Facebook and Twitter for the last, I want to say 10 years on online safety. The advice that we gave is that not all deepfakes should be banned, but only deepfakes that cause harm, individual harm and social harm, and that do not constitute parody, satire, or part of a hysterical lesson. And we can't trust an algorithm to solve the problem. We need an expensive solution, by which I mean human beings, content moderators.
So the reason that people are frustrated with the platforms is because they say, why can't we just tweak the algorithm and make all the false stuff go away? Well, the problem is the majority of content that we see is not true or false. It's somewhere in the middle, and it's this concept of the weaponization of context. Genuine content used out of context. The most effective disinformation is that which has a kernel of truth. That's why the platforms struggle so much, and I feel like there's a certain naivety around deepfakes and synthetic media, which is like, well, that is a clear bucket, and we will not allow that bucket. Does that mean they're not going to allow your film? Maybe. I don't know, and I think we need more of those case studies. You know, I think we will see better and more effective labeling, because human brains require these heuristics and mental shortcuts. And right now on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, there are no heuristics. It's just what you see with your eyes, and that's why we're struggling so much.
So we have all these studies about social psychology, about how even if you say something is a lie, if it confirms your own beliefs, confirmation bias, we believe the lie. Even if we're told it's a lie. Like, we're kind of the bug in the code, you know, human beings. We're the ones liking, clicking, sharing. We're the ones buying it, and we're the ones passing it on, right? It's not the technology itself. We are the problem, right? And so, yes, education could be counterproductive because the liar can seize on it. You know, don't believe your eyes. It's all nonsense, fake news. I think we're more sophisticated than that, right? We're more sophisticated customers. So my hope is that with enough lead time in education, I'm not gonna say we're gonna forestall damage, but we can minimize it. And that's, I guess, my greatest hope.
I find myself thinking in the realms of disinformation as a societal danger. What we've seen so far has been some people ready to be persuaded by extremely thin evidence generated quite shallowly. For that group of people inclined to believe that way, susceptible to believing that way, better verisimilitude through deepfakes isn't really the variable. Of course, we also live in a world in which people may not look at the story at all. They're only looking at the headline. And again, if that's the case, the deepfake doesn't need to be so deep to get people having a notion in their mind that maybe takes them in a direction away from reality.
I think we're already starting to see the way the idea about manipulated media and deepfakes is being weaponized irrespective of whether they're deepfakes. So there's all this controversy about, should this video that's edited, or this video that looks like it's slowed down, or this video that's maybe deepfaked, should it be taken down? So we're going to see in this year lots of debates where all sides basically weaponize the idea that it could be fake, or that anything that looks like it might be fake should be addressed for their own political ends or their own ends. I think on a 2-year horizon, it does seem likely we're going to see more used in a range of malicious settings, just because of the technology trends, right? Like the way in which we're seeing an increase in access, the appification of tools, the speedy improvements in audio, and also in kind of multimodal techniques, the ones that are video and audio combined. Like those are ones where once you start to have that, that's really sort of giving you a whole package. So it does feel like on a 2-year horizon, we're likely to see it. Now, whether that is anywhere near the scale of all the other ways people manipulate media, probably not, right? But it'll just be another part of this that we have to deal with.
Yeah, in my imagination, everybody gets a soul and decides that they're going to play fair. In the dystopia that I live in every day, we are headed towards hyper-personalized content marketing that we have never asked for but are subject to. And that could include anything from inserting people's pictures into advertisements for X, Y, and Z products, all the way to personalized pornography. And if you can't figure out how to do it at home, there will be industries that will do this for you. I think deepfakes has within it this kernel of a very nefarious and dangerous problem for society that we haven't really thought much about. And I would hate for us to get into the position where there are so many social harms caused that we have to shut down most of what we value about social media, which is the free and open communication, in order to stop some of these businesses and political operatives from winning.
So we've always had this essential trust in what we see, and there's lots of literature about how we are more trusting of visuals. Even though we can critically say, well, maybe it's been cropped and framed and edited, we still have this trust. The fear with deep fakes is that that trust that we have developed, whether it's about believing a war crime or police brutality or any kind of protest footage, to all of a sudden have people say, we don't know whether that's true. And so it's a kind of the shrugging that I'm most concerned about, which is it won't be any one particular moment. It will just be a gradual sense of, well, you probably can't trust that. Deepfakes are coming. We can't stop them. They are absolutely coming. Because it's all happening so quickly, I worry that we're gonna take the wrong turn. We're not gonna do something we should have done. And the historians will look back in 2050 and say, they had this really sweet moment between 2020 and 2022, and they totally dropped the ball. Yep.
I think we're going to see both the really destructive uses of the technology and really pro-social uses of it. You don't want to ban technologies because it's really what we as human beings building them do with them. A knife is really safe and wonderful when you use it in the kitchen to cut up a chicken you're going to roast, but it's actually a problem when you use it to stab someone. And the same is true with this deepfake technology, right? We can use it in really pro-social ways to serve as lessons of history. That was fascinating. Seeing a speech you didn't give and gets us to think about humanity and the importance of the Apollo and what it meant for all of us. And at the same time, you're teaching us a lesson about how we can be so taken by a video and believe it, and it's not true. And in many ways, it's such an important part of the human rights story, using video and audio to show the world viscerally human suffering and human rights violation. It's been incredibly important to the story of the recognition of human rights violations. So my great hope is that we don't lose that as an important tool. I don't think we're going to change our gut reactions to audio and video anytime soon.
I think there is going to be something interesting about how people use deepfakes for satire and parody to poke fun or challenge the powerful. That is kind of the flip side of mis and disinformation, and often they get confused, right? Or people gaslight you into believing one is the other. So I hope we'll see that, and I think that's going to be one of the most interesting spaces, is working out
How do we protect that while also not letting it turn into an excuse that, anything goes to present people saying something they never did?
Yeah, I think it's a magic piece of film, and I think it's a reminder that whilst there's so much fear around this technology, there are also amazing opportunities that I think maybe we haven't explored as much as we should have done. We've never been very good at teaching people how to make sense of media that they consume. And I would argue back in the days of Photoshop, we never really explained what Photoshop was. Most people couldn't afford it and didn't know that it existed. And then there was this whole conversation with young girls being like, my thighs don't look like the thighs on the front cover of Vogue. And it was like, well, they have cellulite, but they get Photoshopped out. And people were like, what's Photoshop? Then there was this kind of like awakening in the late 1990s of what Photoshop was. And so I think my challenge with deepfakes is, I don't think we should be shutting them down. I mean, I think this film in particular is just a reminder of how magical they could be and will be. But then we have to recognize, how are we going to label that? We need to help people understand, give them context, recognize that when we're overwhelmed, we don't stop and think. We need to build in friction to the system. There's a whole host of different things, rather than go, oh my goodness, we can't have deepfakes. Because we as humans have gone through different moments where we've had to evolve. Just the speed of evolution now is making us, we can't cope. And that's partly why we're talking in the ways that we're talking about speech, where we should say, this is a good thing, but we're not doing it, I don't think, in a responsible way. We're doing it too quickly. We're not researching this adequately.
When you hear that elegiac speech, and that speech that imagines this alternate history that could have happened, then to me, you're looking at the expressive potential of the medium. It's not just about creating a deepfake to fool people. It's creating a deepfake to ask broader questions. It's asking questions about what would have happened. It's asking questions about what's the role of this technology within our society these days. And it's asking questions about what can we do as individuals in the face of this technology, and ultimately aiming to empower people. That is to say that you can be critically aware, you can be discerning around this technology, and helping you to better understand what role you as an individual can have. And I think that's one of the great powers of the arts. That's one of the things that I most love about this project, is that it's using deepfakes as a medium in the arts to address the issue of misinformation in our society.
That's great.